Just kidding.
Okay, and we're live for reals this time.
I feel like streams are often plagued by the Fae, so
It
makes
is, right?
sense.
Like, I can check all your guys' microphones, but not mine before we start. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. If you're watching live, if you're watching later, thanks for tuning in and checking this out. This is going to be a great book to listen to today. Book to listen to. It's like we're an audiobook here. We're doing Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is the first book in the Expanse series, and it is a blend of space opera, detective noir, not space opera really, but let's say detective
But it
noir,
is.
political thriller, and some hard sci-fi stuff in there too. It's really good. In this, humanity has colonized the solar system. Earth, Mars, and people and the asteroid belt all kind of exist in this uneasy tension. In this book, the story alternates between two viewpoints. We have James Holden, who is an idealistic, is a good, nice way to talk about him. Idealistic ship's officer who uncovers a conspiracy after his ship is attacked. And then we have Detective Miller, who is a world-weary cop on Ceres Station, searching for a missing person named Julie Mao. And their investigations intersect when they discover some dangerous people studying an alien protomolecule. And I'm just going to let you know we're going to talk about some spoilers today. So if you haven't read it or haven't watched the TV show, The Expanse, that this is based off of, then buckle up or pause this for a second, go read it, and come back. Either way.
A really long second.
Yes.
Yeah.
But well worth it.
But well worth it for sure. We're going to talk about some spoilers, but we'll keep it light. It'll be fine. But there's definitely some things that'll come up. We have some great guests with us today. I want to introduce you to some regulars at LTUE who have been in our gaming sections and in talking about our tie-in fiction sections. That's where I watched Brian's presentation last year on tie-in fiction, and I've been in sessions with Marty and Will in a bunch of different things too. And we ran even a big game of Arium 2 years ago with Will. That was a lot of fun too. So what I'm going to do now is just turn it over to you guys to introduce yourself. We're going to start with Marty, and then Will, and then Brian. And then after that, we'll jump into the book. Go ahead, Marty.
Okay. Hi, my name is Maddie Murdoch. I'm a freelancer in the tabletop gaming industry, very specifically having worked on both tie-in fiction and world building and basically writing those manuals that you guys have to buy to play a game. I've worked on I would say most famously worked on Fantasy Flight and AEG's versions of the Legend of the Five Rings game. I've also worked on IPs like Call of Cthulhu for Chaosium, and also most recently, the Expanse RPG for Green Ronin Publishing.
Thanks. All right, Will.
Well, my resume is not as impressive as Madi's, but I've been working on RPGs for quite a few years now. I run the Adept Icarus game design and publishing studio, and we make games like Arium, which is a world-building RPG. And we also publish other RPGs such as Cyan Starlight by Alan Barr, Rue from Ruin by myself and Katie Young, and we work with a lot of really awesome folks on a freelance basis to do writing and art and some of those things. But actually, actually all three of the other people on this panel have worked on things for Adept Icarus, which is such a cool feeling. So I love that.
Awesome. All right, Brian, you're up.
My name's Brian Young. I am a writer. I work in tie-in fiction a lot, so I've written fiction in BattleTech and Shadowrun and Robotech, and work in gaming too. I co-wrote the most recent iteration of the Robotech role-playing game, and have done work in BattleTech and Shadowrun and some other games, more indie games for guys like Alan Barr, and writing fiction for games like Alan's Science Starlight and for Adept Icarus and stuff like that, and just wherever and however I can. I've worked in other licensed universes like Star Wars and Doctor Who and Remo Williams, the Destroyer, and stuff like that. And I just write where the wind takes me, and on top of my own original stuff. So I just love working, and this is the only marketable skill I have. So.
Well, that's not, I don't know if that's true, but you are good at it, Brian. So I appreciate it. You're also one of the few people that I could ever talk to probably about Remo Williams, and would love to sit down and talk that sometime. Man, that's a blast from the past. I shared that with my wife before we got married, just to make sure that she was cool with my strange sense of of not necessarily bad, but low budget, slightly low budget action movies from the 80s, and it worked out good. We're all set there. So, all right, let's talk about this book. This is interesting in not just the subject, but also who it's written by. James S.A. Corey is the pen name by two people, Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. They took their middle names and turned them into first and last names, and then the S.A. are the initials of Abraham's daughter. So that's where this is getting written from. I was going to look up to find out if they alternated viewpoints on it. I don't remember if they did or not, but I thought that would be interesting to find out if one was in charge of Miller and the other in charge of Holden, or what exactly. But I thought that's an interesting way to start off writing a book. You guys have all collaborated on different things. Have you ever had a co-writer on anything? Marty, have you ever had a co-writer? Or Brian, have you ever had a co-writer?
Well, I was going to say that was one of the first things I looked up. And actually, I interviewed these two once before because they wrote a Star Wars book together back in 2013, right before the switch over to the unified canon, and asking them about their process. And yeah, that's how they did do it, is they switched POVs. One of them handled Miller primarily, and the other handled Holden, and then they switched. Then the other would revise it, which feels really seamless. But that was definitely one of the things I looked up as I reread it. I was like, because it feels really seamless. But yeah, no, I've definitely done some collaborative work. I'm co-writing a series of BattleTech graphic novels right now with Mike Stackpole, which is such a fascinating experience. Especially since he's written like a fazillion X-Wing like comic books, just like working with him on that. It's interesting how much control he does want, but how much he doesn't want, and how much freedom he offers. It's very, I imagine it's much different than how these guys are working.
Yeah, that is interesting. What do you think, Marty? Have you ever what's it like writing with a co-writer?
Oh, yeah, certainly. All of the major IPs that I've worked on include a team of writers, right? Because you're either trying to divide up a book so that it takes less time to write, or you're just trying to get a bunch of different, perspectives from very talented people on a project. And so absolutely, I've been on teams where, we'll just divide up the work and we'll have one Zoom call and then never talk again. And then I've also been on teams where we'll talk every day and we'll just shoot each other messages all day long and questions, and we try to like collaborate. I most recently, when I was working on this one for the Expanse RPG, I was working closely with the editor editor who kind of set me apart from everyone else because I was writing the introductory chapter and everyone else was writing like the adventures for that. And so I didn't get to actually work with the team. I just got to work with the editor who was working with the team. And then once they finished all their chapters, then they sent it over to me. And so it's a very interesting process because I think basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to kind of tailor your own imagination to not just the match the IP and whatever the kind of I would say editors are trying to do with the project itself, but also try to like match the writing quality and talent based on like a style guide or based on an accepted pitch for the book or things like that. And so it is a very interesting process and it can be pretty fun. It could also be kind of challenging at times because you're just like waiting on other people. But once the project is over, it's really cool to see what everyone's come up with, which is, I think, some of the funnest work I've ever done. It's been collaborative for sure.
That is fun. That is fun. And Will, you've managed a bunch of people writing at the same time. Have you written too? And
Yeah, so I've set up some of these types of things like Madi mentioned, right, where multiple people are working on the same project together, and I've done some of the writing on them, and I've done writing for other, groups doing that same approach. But I've also done a really different approach to collaborative writing that I don't know if anybody else has done before. It's really weird. I don't know if I don't know, maybe lots of people do it, who knows. But I have a couple of people who I co-write with where we get on a call together and we'll have a shared document open and we'll actually like talk through and work on stuff like almost in real time. And maybe one person will do some writing and then maybe the other one will go back and revise it really quick, but we usually take turns and one person will be driving and one person kind of watching and making comments and things as you go. And that's the way that I actually prefer to work these days when it comes to writing. So I do quite a bit of that.
Zoom writing.
That sounds nerve-wracking to me. Like writing while someone's over your shoulder, backseat writing.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Wow.
Yeah. So three or four different ways to do it there. That's awesome. I remember trying to write a novel with my best friend in high school, and we would sit in our little closet of an office in my dad's house and try and type away at the same time almost. And that is not the way to do it. That's the way I would not recommend, is both trying to type at the same time on a little Mac anymore. Let's talk about what you like about this book. Like if you're going to recommend this book to somebody, Brian, what would you say? Like, this is my favorite thing about this book, or about just this in general. All of you are sci-fi writers too, which is awesome. What is it that really, really grabs you as far as the sci-fi in this book and says, oh yeah, this is something I really like, and this is why I like it?
As far as the sci-fi, it really nailed the feeling of science, like hard science fiction. So that like it felt like there was math involved, if that makes sense. Like which a lot of sci-fi doesn't actually do. And maybe that doesn't, I mean, I can take that or leave that, but if we're just talking about the sci-fi, but for me, the sales pitch for me, if I were trying to tell people like you really need to check this book out, is the sense of narrative intrigue that the book really exudes, right? Like it's hard to put it down because it asks so many intriguing questions in such a short space of time. And every time you get a little hint of an answer, there's two more questions that sort of come up behind it. And because the characters and the points of view are so compelling, you want to just keep reading. Like you want to burn through it, and it doesn't feel as long as it is. And when you get to the end, you're like, you don't feel like it's been as long as it was. It almost feels like it's too short, which is why it's a 5-book series and not, not just the one book.
Yeah, agreed. I agree absolutely. I think the ending, they could have ended at one book. I think that you have a satisfying ending there, but I do think that like there's so much that they build on and so much that absolutely keep reading it for sure. And I recommend that to anybody. That's a good point. I liked there are a lot of cliffhanger endings to chapters in this book. If you like that kind of thing, if that keeps you going, they will switch off to the other narrative right at the exact wrong time for you to put the book down. So I like that too. But I did like what you said too about the hard sci-fi. It's a lot of good math in there that isn't detracting. It doesn't detract from the story, but makes you feel like, oh, they actually talked to somebody that knows what they're talking about. What
They
were you going
did
to say,
their
Marty?
research.
Yeah, what
Oh,
were you
I
going to
was I
say?
was I was going to comment on like the chapters ending. That was something that I noticed again on my read through. I've read the book series many times in preparation to write for the RPG, but I didn't notice how sometimes like Miller would end with a line that was basically like establishing like an event that happened, but it hadn't happened yet from like Holden's point of view, and so it was kind of like we were getting a small glimpse into the future every single time. And so then we'd understand like what was going to happen in the next chapter just from that kind of throwaway that was like, oh yeah, and then the government collapsed, and we're like, wait, what? And then we see it from Holden's perspective and watching it in a in a different way. And so it was very intriguing to like see those like jumping off points every single chapter end to kind of get a glimpse at what we were about to experience, which was really cool. Really draws you in.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
Which,
I want to talk about the converging narratives too. Go ahead, Brian.
well, I was gonna say, which makes me wonder, knowing how they wrote it with them alternating POVs, if those endings are a result of meticulous planning or revision or some combination of the two.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, that's a good
It's a
I
question.
mean,
great question.
it's very like it's we were talking about the word flawless before, seamless, right? Like it does feel like you would have to maybe go back and add some things to make it flow that well. Unless these guys are brilliant and they just can read each other's minds and they're like, well, I know where you're gonna go with the narrative, which I mean, that's hard to do.
Yeah,
Certainly.
yeah. I mean, there would have to be a certain amount of planning also.
Mhm.
So, like, they would have to know, like, okay, here's where you're going to go, especially in the moments where they do converge.
Mhm. And I did hear that the two authors actually wrote at least part of the original story as part of a RPG campaign that they were playing through. They were playing D20 Modern, and they
Okay.
had basically written a whole bunch of homebrew rules to make it fit the sci-fi world. And I think once I guess the Holden, you know, story started emerging, they realized that it was good enough to perhaps be a novel. And so I think that maybe like the major plot points had already been established by that playthrough. And so maybe that does give them a little bit of a guideline for where they want the novel to go.
That makes a lot of
Mm.
sense. That would make a lot of sense. What about you, Will? What's your pitch on this to somebody to get them to read it?
You know, I did this backwards. So I watched the series before I read a single book. And I can't even tell you the number of books I have DNF'd, do not finish, because I watched something first instead of reading the book first. Because I can't, like, I have such a hard time feeling invested if I already know what's going to happen to an extent, right? This series is not that way, right? I watched it, I came back and read it later, and I loved it. And so that's my real pitch is it's still great. It doesn't matter that you know what's going to happen. It's incredible. Read it. So that's the short version. The slightly longer version is I just love, I don't know, there's something about kind of a murder mystery in space with stakes for all of humanity that just like I don't know, it's so cool. It's the diverging, plot, the plot lines are incredible in this. It's just so cool, and the characters are wonderful. So yeah.
Let's talk about that. Marty, how did you feel it balanced the detective noir and the horror? That was the other one I was trying to think of, and I should have been reading my notes instead of just talking. There's a little bit of horror, a little bit of adventure exploration, space exploration, and there's
Mhm.
detective noir. Like these, do you feel like it's jarring to jump from one voice to another, or did you feel like they did a good job with it? What do you think, Marty?
I don't think that it was jarring because, right, the book starts off from Julie Mao's perspective, right? We kind of get a sense of this is going to be a very visceral, gritty narrative of, like the difficulties of living in space, like the harsh realities of what that looks like. And the end of the chapter ends with her seeing, the horrific kind of flesh monster, right? That gives us that tone of like what the rest of the story is going to be. So I think it sets us expectations very, very well, so that as the story progresses, we understand that this is not necessarily a single genre story. This is a novel that is going to talk about all of the harsh realities of living in space, and that is going to include a plethora of different visceral engagements with the story. And so I think that just from tempering expectations, I think that that is a brilliant way to start the book, because I do feel like some novels that do try to blend genres don't establish that expectation early in the audience. And so when people, get to a certain point in the book, they're like, wait, this isn't what I was promised. It does feel jarring and it doesn't feel true to whatever brand the book was trying to sell. And so it does kind of take people out of the narrative. But I think because of that, initial foundation, we knew what to expect and we were along for the ride because we had already accepted that that was how it was going to be from the first chapter.
That's a great point and a great tip to keep the promises that you make in the themes and stuff. Brian, you've got something to
I
say,
think
but you also, I wanted to ask, I think it was, I don't remember if it was the Voidbreaker book or something, but you talked
yeah.
about trying to merge together a couple of different themes. I don't know, I don't remember if it was that book or a different one, but anyway, how do you handle that, and what did you feel about bouncing between those things in Leviathan Wakes?
Well, I think well, to add on to Marty's point, I think in keeping that promise, one of the other things that it did really well is not only set the foundation with the first chapter, but I think it also created two different extremes on sides of a pendulum with Miller and Holden's POVs. And so anything on either side of those pendulums, or even pushing past those boundaries, felt like it was a possibility, because there's such a drastic contrast between them. Like Holden's stuff feels very clean, and not clean, but like there's definitely a danger and a thriller there, but it's like they're normal working people. And Miller's stuff is very gritty and dirty, and there's drugs and there's street level stuff. And so like hitting you with body horror when you've got those different extremes doesn't feel so out of the realm of possibility, because you're swinging back and forth between pendulums, between sides of the pendulum anyway.
That's a great point.
And you mentioned Voidbreaker, which is a book I wrote where I'm it came out this year, and it's in the BattleTech universe, and BattleTech is very military sci-fi, and it was me trying to bring a spy thriller into military sci-fi.
Yeah.
And it was a careful balance, trying for me to try to figure out like what are those two genres, what is the core of those two genres, and what do those two audiences need to feel served by, and what are the essentials of those. And I think that's one of the things that I tried to do with that book, that I think in Leviathan Wakes that Abraham and Frank, or Corey, do really well, is that if you're reading it because you want a noir mystery, you're very well served by that. If you're reading it because you want a cool sci-fi body horror, you're very well served by that. If you're reading it because you want a cool military sci-fi space opera, you're very well served by that. So you're never undernourished by any of the specific genres that they split the narrative into. So they're not giving any of them short shrift, so that when you go in, you're not feeling like you're being cheated by any of those, so that you're getting a full meal any left turn you're making.
So if you're gonna write a book and you're gonna put in two different genres and you're gonna smash them together, the point is
Yeah.
to get each of them correct and to make
Yeah,
sure.
no, I mean, I think one of the best examples of that, and I use this in classes I teach all the time, is Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead, right? It has every beat of a zombie movie and it has every beat of a romantic comedy. So, like, when you go in, I mean, like, you're laughing because, like, you're like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's
it's
true.
true.
absolutely
It's
right.
absolutely true.
Yeah. Like, if you go in and you want romantic comedy beats, you're going to be well served by every single beat you'd expect out of a romantic comedy. Um, and and you just have to figure out how to blend those together so that they work together so that neither one of them is missing any of those foundational beats. And they did that with multiple genres here. um, Princess Bride is another one of those where they do that with so many different genres and it doesn't miss any of those beats, even if those beats are overlapping where one story beat might work for four different genres that they're homaging, but it still has them all.
Awesome. And Will, you work in a lot of genres, I know, and so any insight you have on this too. But I also want to, after this, transition into, because I think this is a good point. We've got these two different genres that they're working in, and Brian brought up how you're telling one, and one character's point of view feels this way, and the other character's point of view feels this way too. But I want to transition to characters as well, and think about this as you're talking, and everybody else that, like Miller represents a certain outlook on life, and he is kind of the epitome of that. And then Holden is not just the exact opposite, but pretty close, and has a different, more, like I said, idealistic view, whereas Miller is the opposite of that, and he's the realistic view and stuff. And I'd love to talk about that more too, in the characterization and how they balance that in both of these characters. So yeah, I'd love to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on
Um,
different balances, Will.
yeah. I think I mean I think the world building is phenomenal in the series, and the fact that they're able to mix sort of the genres the way that they do from those aspects as well as the narrative is really, and it's really impressive to me the way they do it with the narrative personally. Like I can build mixed genre worlds all day long, but doing it successfully, and I think Brian really nailed it, right? With the idea that you have to hit all the beats. So basically you want to do this, great, but you're creating twice the amount of work for yourself in some regard. So be careful
Mhm.
for that if you decide you want to, emulate James S.A. Corey. So something to keep in mind maybe. But it's done so well and so deftly, right? And you don't ever find yourself missing the thing that isn't there. And I think that's how it's so successful in that way. Um, to maybe transition more to characters, I I think there's a lot to talk about here. I'm going to hit one point in particular that I think is interesting. I'm going to leave plenty of space for other people to talk. But I love the way that dichotomy happens between those two, and it's very much because they do. Spoiler alert: they do eventually meet, right? And when they do, it's a little bit of an odd couple type of scenario, right? And I love that. That's really fun for me as a reader. So and I really enjoyed that part of it a lot. I think you get there's a big payoff there, right? When that happens, and you get to see it. Like, what is it like for them? Like these two people are so different, and then they finally meet. And wow, like it's really I like that. I enjoy it.
Yeah. What do you think, Brian? What about the two characters and their opposites? Does it work for you? Does it not? Is it sometimes
No,
what does
it
make it
re-
work?
it I think the thing that makes it work is the slow realization as the reader that we're not we're not forced to try to pick a side, right? Because the story, and in fact the world, needs realists as much as it needs idealists, and the day wouldn't be saved without Holden and Miller doing the things that they did, even though they both despised in many ways the things that they both did,
Mhm.
and that it creates a very cogent, interesting point that it says something about us and our world, that like, we can't all be idealists, we can't all be realists, and we're all going to be different, and that the story needed that contrast in a very specific way. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked. And having them be sort of oil and vinegar in the middle where they're meeting, and as a reader, it creates a really great tension where you're like, I just want these two to get along. I wish they'd make better decisions so that they can. I wish they'd both make better decisions so that they could come to some understanding with each other, so that I don't have to see them, hate each other and part ways, but they both have to make the decisions they have to make, not only because of the character arcs they're going on, which are very honest to them, to the characters as they're built and presented, but because that's what they believe they need to do. It was just really well done. It's really, really good character work.
Absolutely is. I was thinking as you were talking about how you really do want them to get along, and the oh man, it's so well written. But there is a scene where you get to see that when they both decide, they look at each other and like, oh, you want to go into Ares Station, don't you? And the other one's like, yeah, I totally do. And the way that scene is written is like they know that they both shouldn't do it. Like logically, they should try and escape and get out. But both of them have reasons. They both line up in that case, and they're like, "Oh, okay, we're together in this. We're going." And it doesn't work
Yeah.
out well for them, and they learn some more stuff about each other that drives a little wedge in later, and that's just so great.
I think
Yeah, yeah. What do you say?
I was going to say, I think that's why the narrative. I think it was a very conscious choice that the narrative unites them in their radiation sickness.
Mhm.
That they're on those opposite tracks of idealism versus realism, but it unites them in their humanity as far as their physical ailments.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
but I also think that it's really interesting because we were talking about genres before, right? And we kind of, because we're familiar as readers with the genres, we kind of inherently know that, like, the partnership that they are forging is not going to work because we have Miller on a track for being a noir hero, which means that his story arc is ultimate tragedy, right? Like he might win out, but at great cost, right? So he's not going to get the woman of his dreams. We know that. We know that it's likely that he's not going to be able to fly away on the spaceship with the rest of the crew. And we have like this moment of real interesting tragedy where Holden is essentially saying like, "Hey, once this is all done, we're gonna get all on the spaceship and fly away together." And Miller has this moment in his heart where he feels like that sounds great. I feel like I have a place and a home, but like as I'm reading that chapter, I'm like, but you don't because you are a noir hero. And so Holden and his crew are probably gonna, win out of the day, and Holden's gonna get the girl, and he's gonna be able to walk away with fame and fortune and all of the things that, his idealistic story is going to get him. But Miller can't. He's not, that's not his story arc. So it's so interesting to like see those moments of tension where the genres do kind of rub up against each other, and we do wish, right, that they wouldn't keep going on the trajectory that
Yeah,
they're on. But again, as Brian mentioned, like then we wouldn't be satisfied with what the genres demand, which is so
that's true.
interesting.
That's true. I
Now,
like that
when
this is
I
a book where, sorry, I was just gonna say, I like that where this is a
go
book
ahead.
where the characters grow but also stay true to themselves, and that's kind of
Hmm.
nice too. Go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
No, when I read Holden's intros, like I almost had Fred McMurray's opening speech into the um, tape recorder in Double Indemnity playing in my head, where it's like I did it for money and I did it for the woman, but I didn't get the money and I didn't get the woman. Like it had that whole vibe to it already from the beginning, exactly like you're saying, like because they really nailed that noir vibe and that noir tone from the beginning with him, to the point where it's like, yeah, like you're gonna get somebody's gonna knife you in the back, and it's gonna be horrible, and you're gonna go through all of this tragedy, and I'm here for it, and it's gonna suck, but we're going on this together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think there's something for the audience there that maybe isn't necessarily there for that type of story because they still get the idealistic, like the hero's journey or whatever of a sort, right? um so to people who that isn't their thing, right, I think it still resonates the way that they've delivered it. um and that, I think, is the thing that is just so hard to pull off, right? um,
But I
Oh,
think they also kind of learn from each other's trajectories, right? I mean, there
yeah.
is a kind of glory in the way that Miller's character dies at the end, which I think
Oh
that he
yeah.
never expected to achieve, right? And it is because he did meet the trajectory that James Holden was on, and so he kind of was able to end his story in a way that he didn't die in a gutter somewhere on Ceres Station, right? Like he actually was able to go down in a blaze of glory amidst the stars,
Sure.
right? Which is very interesting.
With some semblance of the woman he wanted to.
Right, right. So there's
Yeah.
a little bit of a redemption there, or maybe James Holden's magic rubbed off on him.
how do you guys feel about the ending, and even the lead up to the ending? For example, I remember the first time I read it, like I saw it coming this time, and was like, oh yeah, there's still a bunch left. But I remember getting to a point where it's like, oh okay, well they've got this plan. They're gonna take care of the asteroid. They figured out how to do it, and it's going to be a really creative way, and it sounds awesome. I really want to see, like they set it up. I want to see what
Mhm.
happens when you smash a giant ship into an asteroid. I think that's great. And then I looked and saw how much was left in the book at some point, and I remember thinking, oh wait, what else are they going to write about? The book's over. But in this case, that spoiler alert, that doesn't work, and
Mhm.
they have to go through a bunch of other stuff to get to the end. Still, how did you feel about the ramping up? We talk sometimes about leveling up the tension every time, and the stakes have to get higher every time, and that kind of thing. How did you feel about the end? Did it go on too long for you? Did it feel about right? And then was it satisfying? Marty, you already talked about the archetypal endings there. I think that that's important to keep in mind as you're reading that that both of these characters get different endings, and that's probably okay. What did you think, Brian? How'd you like the end?
I think the ending worked really, really well the way it played out. I think if the plan would have worked the first time, it would have actually felt really unsatisfying and it would have left too many loose threads dangling. I think it ended the way it needed to, if that makes sense. Like, I think analyzing the ending and examining exactly how and why they ended it the way they did, it's because they needed to do it that way, and it's like the only logical way to have done it. It feels like sort of like rebuilding it from the end backwards, because if their plan would have worked, it would have felt like it would have come too easily. Like victory would have been way too easy. Like, oh, your first plan, which already felt very unlikely, just happened to work. Um, I think we would have felt cheated by that, right? Like that would be like watching a James Bond movie. Like take the man with the golden gun, for example, and it's like, oh, we've got a contract killer here who never misses, who's going to kill James Bond, and James Bond goes, I'll take care of it. Goes out, finds him, and kills him like 10 minutes into the movie. Right? It would be like, oh, well, I guess James Bond is the best. I guess we're going home now. You know what I
That's the
mean? Like
end.
that's what ending there would have felt like.
That makes sense. How'd you like the ending, Marty?
Um, I I really liked the ending because I feel like Miller is my favorite character, and so I feel like him having the kind of like the final, I guess, like plan to fix everything in a way that I felt very true to what his strengths were, was very poetically satisfying to me, I guess. Because I feel like his strength is kind of in the small station, back alley, like conversation types of things. Whereas, the original plan was much more like grandiose and had a lot of moving parts, and so I feel like that certainly was, yeah, like a fantastical way to solve the problem. Whereas the narrative is kind of rooted in realism, and so I did like that. We had this grandiose plan, and it didn't fail. And what actually worked was a conversation, right? Like a conversation based on a connection that Miller had been building for the whole narrative. Like felt very satisfying to me. And I feel like even though it was tragic, it was still very cool. So it wasn't grandiose and powerful and amazing, but it was still like, he was communicating with some sort of alien sentience, right? Like that still was very interesting. So an excellent way to do that.
But it opened it up to something like hope beyond that like maybe this sentience could build something that could offer that hope that Holden held on to.
Right, right.
Like Miller was keeping that door open in a way that he hadn't had before.
Hmm. I think that's true because there is a point in the book where Miller says he's a two-person. He has two personalities, right? He has his like death self, which is the fatalist who is ready to give up and not fight because the world is against him. And then there's the version that is suddenly starting to emerge, which is, I think, after he's met James, where it's starting to kind of take hold of himself, where it's like, maybe
Yeah.
I can try something. And that
Yeah.
is because of they're coming together on Arrow Station, that becomes part of his personality.
Yeah, I like that thought a lot. I like that he is reconciling the two parts of him at the end. It is a very satisfying ending. I think so too. What do you think, Will? How did it land for you?
Really well. I can't disagree with anything anyone has said about it. I think that would be silly. It's a fantastic ending. The one thing I'll add is maybe, they did do a pretty good job of landing kind of what feels like a satisfying ending, and this is a trick like that authors are often good at. I think like the novel, yeah.
Can we talk about the world building for a minute? What was your favorite part as far as when you noticed the authors? Not that something pulled you out, but what was something that you noticed and said, "Oh yeah, this is drawing me in." What was the world building thing that you saw that pulled you in the most?
I think the slang and I think the culture differences in a way that I think they did something really smart with the Belters and the folks from like Holden's partners on series, where they kind of showed the casual racism that people might go through symbolically, but in a way that like even racists would be able to understand without having to face their own racism uh like so blatantly, if that makes sense, where like they could see how they might be. It was just really elegantly done how they could show racism um on the station in a way that people would go, "Oh, that's not political, that's just science fiction,"
Hmm.
but it's very very elegantly done metaphor.
I like it. There's something in there about how people are always the same. Even hundreds of years in the future, we can rely on people to still be the same and still have the same kind of attitudes towards things. My wife and I went and saw Jurassic Park, the latest one, a little bit ago, and she leaned over a little bit into the movie when they were establishing everything and said, the most realistic part about this movie is the fact that after 10 years, everybody would get tired of dinosaurs and stop going to watch them. And I'm like, yeah, they would. We totally would. What'd you like about the world building, Marty?
Um, I have always felt like I would personally, if I had the opportunity to go to space, I never would because I felt like I would feel too claustrophobic. Um, there's just something about like being locked in a space with limited air supply and like not being able to like see the sky. Or I think they even mentioned in the book, one of the scenes was like, oh, you could tell that this person has never been in a room with real wood furniture in it before, like, because wood is not going to be in space. And so, like, just little details like that that helped me realize, like, what actually that would look like beyond my personal anxieties, I felt like was really drawing me in. Because I would realize like what kinds of concerns that I was concerned about as an earther were going to be very different from the concerns that other people in different spaces were faced with. And so it just kind of helped me personally just overcome just a little hiccup I had in just the thought of going to space, because I felt like it made it more realistic personally. Like I love that scene where Miller's like watching the kid like flying a kite in like the air circulator, right? Where it's a very familiar scene where I'm like, oh yeah, like that people are still gonna be doing like the mundane, the normal, the fun things in space. It's just different, just a little bit
Yeah.
different.
And scary. Everything wants to kill you.
Yeah, yeah. But like there's a beauty in that, right? Like building a life in a place where you're almost guaranteed to fail, right? Like is so interesting. And I think that it really does speak to, right? I think the human ingenuity that I think is a major theme in this book series.
Well, what was your favorite world building point that really grabbed you?
Well, Brian kind of stole mine. That's okay. I've got another one, but I do think like that different that political balance between Mars, Earth, and the Belt is really interesting, and how, that all comes together, and that definitely hooked me really quickly. But another thing I thought was really interesting, and that really sort of redoubled my interest in the book, but also in the series as I was watching it, was when we discover the protomolecule, and then we discover that, basically, corporate people are, doing stuff with it, and they've got their agenda, and they're not thinking about the consequences of what they're trying to do. And sort of seeing that play out in fiction is really interesting. And I think we have, a lot of parallels in our life today, which are really interesting. And I loved seeing that, and that element just kind of sucked me right in even more. So
It
That's a good
it
one.
felt way too relevant reading it now, where it's just like we just need to give it more data, like we're just shoveling all of our
Sure.
work into the
The
into the
AI.
into AI,
Sure.
right? Where it's
Right.
just like
yeah,
this could never
yeah,
have any poor consequences
no,
whatsoever.
Right,
no.
right.
It was very prescient reading it this time in this year, because I read it back in COVID, I think was when I read it the first time. But reading it
Mm,
today was like, oh yeah, there's some metaphors that they didn't intend that are still relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
The other big world building that's just like so really well done, and it's so hard to do, was the slang.
Mm.
Slang is so hard to do,
Sure. The banter
and
Creole.
yeah, and they did such a good job with it. Like, because usually, like, you'll read slang in books and you just kind of want to roll your eyes into the back of your head because it's so forced, but it felt so natural here.
There was a
Mhm.
purpose to it, and it was a
Yeah,
big, yeah. There was a reason for it, and it felt like it came from someplace and didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was.
Mhm.
yeah.
It wasn't just somebody saying frack for frack's sake.
Right. Like I kind of compared it to some of the slang that they use in like the Firefly TV show, where they're like, "Oh, the major cultures that got off Earth are like Chinese and English speakers," and so we're kind of like
Mm.
blending some of that together. But I think that they did a really good job here, where they're blending it to the point where it's got Portuguese influence, African influence, Chinese influence, right? Like all sorts of influences in there, that it almost becomes unrecognizable, and yet it is still so. like whatever languages like we may know as readers, like kind of gives it some sort of like linguistic logic, right? And so it does feel like a patois, right? Like a
Yeah.
mixture of just so much history and culture that just feels so human.
But adding to that too, some of the new etymology that comes from the world they built in the future from the things that they're experiencing
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
we don't have experience with, that we only pick up from the context that they invent. They're really, I mean, those two are really good at that.
Sure.
They're really smart at that stuff. It's really remarkable.
I will say that one I would say idiom or maybe analogy that kind of or allusion that came out in some of the dialogue that I had a little bit of a contest with was James Holden said something about like there's no daddy warbucks to like swoop in and like save everyone, and I was like, are people still watching Annie 200, 300, 400 years into the future? I'm like, okay, if that is a piece of media that has continued to exist, cool.
Apparently, Annie is universal.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Well, I
It is
mean,
the beloved story
who knows?
for all
Maybe
time.
as soon as I mean the comics are probably already close to public domain. Maybe somebody takes the public domain comics and makes them go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah,
Yeah. There we
some
That's
go.
a good call
transformative
out.
use. Somebody makes a huge role playing game out of them, and
Little Orphan Annie, the role playing game.
yeah,
Right.
Daddy Warbucks is the GM.
I'm sure that's why they would persist
Yeah.
several
Daddy,
hundred years in the future.
all of the players are Daddy Warbucks, and they're all trying to
Yep.
adopt the most children.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Speaking of adaptations, let's talk about that for a second. We'll let you go first, so nobody steals your thoughts on this one. How did you feel the? I want to talk about two things. How did you feel that the TV show did in adapting the book? And I know that I'm not going to say who, but I know that some people haven't seen the TV show on here. So if you haven't, then how do you feel about adaptations in general? All of you have done adaptations of a novel or a TV show or a cartoon even into a game or vice versa. How does that work? What's good? What makes it a good one? What makes a bad one? And then just how well does this one work? What do you think, Will?
Yeah. I'll talk mostly about this one, but I might circle back if and talk about adapting into games at some point potentially, or like add on. But I'll leave some space for that. Um, Adapting this into the series, again, I watched it backwards. So I watched the series and then I came to the books. And so I did not realize how much of the second book was in the first season of the series until after I came back and read the book. And then I realized, oh, there's whole characters that don't even exist yet, right? Um, and I thought it was done very deftly. And honestly, this is a trend that I've seen. I've watched several different series, and some of them I was smart enough to read the books before I watched them. And I've noticed them doing the same sort of approach where it's like, hey, we've got this series, we're going to turn it, this series of books, we're going to turn it into a television series, and we'll take two books and we're going to adapt them into one story and have that be the first season. Um, and your mileage may vary. I think they don't all pull it off perfectly, but in this case, I think it's done very well. And they bring in some characters from the second book. They bring in a little bit more of the viewpoint of Mars and Earth, right? Where the initial book is very much Belter centered, but you find out about those other areas a little bit based on how they're interacting with the Belters. But in the series, it's actually pulling in characters from those areas. And so you're finding a little bit more about that alternative viewpoint from the very beginning. And I think that's pretty compelling, actually. I really enjoyed it. And it certainly, like, I didn't hesitate. I started watching the series, I think there were 5 seasons at the time or something. And we powered through a lot of Expanse before basically everything that was available and didn't watch anything else until it was done. So
Good.
yeah, yeah.
It is a well-made show, and it is true. I think true in a lot of ways to the book, both in the things that they put in, but also in the themes and the ideas and the feeling of it. It feels right.
Mhm.
Would you agree with
Yes.
that, Marty? How much have you read and watched? And
Yeah, I've read all of
I
the
mean,
books multiple times, and I've watched the show actually quite a bit. I feel I think the character that Will is kind of referring to is specifically in the second book that comes in the first season of the show, is Christian Avasarala, who's kind of like the UN leader of Earth, right? And I was actually thinking about this because I feel like their showrunner's choice to introduce a book two character into season one is kind of to make the show maybe more accessible to people, because I think sci-fi is hard to necessarily like get into and hit like in the sense that I feel like some people need references to something familiar first, right? And I feel like having an Earth perspective to a audience of primarily people who live on Earth, like we all do, right? Like we're all from Earth. I think people would immediately come to this show asking questions like, well, what about Earth? Right? Like I think that would be like on the main kind of question on people's mind. Like sure, certainly Mars is cool and the belt is interesting, but like I think people would still wonder about that so much that it would maybe makes I feel like it does kind of give a little bit of familiarity to people, giving them a reference point from which they could kind of engage the world building a little bit. Um, and I think that was an interesting choice because but it also I think gives the show or the adaptation a lot more options for telling the story in a broader scale, because the season one, I guess, goal is to get everyone aware of the setting, right? Whereas I feel like the book's goal is not necessarily just the setting, it's also like the characters. And so I feel like having two books worth of characters to work with in a show setting is great for TV, but I feel like, narrowing it down for one novel, I think we don't necessarily need all of that because we're focused on two main characters and not necessarily worried about some of that other stuff. And so we're worried about the world so much as like these two guys experience it, which I think is a little different, if that makes sense.
so different storytelling techniques for different
Yeah.
audiences, but still works. You're working on the role playing game. What are you doing to make sure that the adaptation feels like you're reading Leviathan Wicks or
Sure.
watching the
So, I
Expanse?
mean, one of the things that was, I would say, absolutely important is that we did have an editor who was in charge of narrative, and he essentially gave me a style guide and a story Bible and said, like, this is the brand of the Expanse. Make sure that everything that you include in your project follows these rules. And so we even had like a Belter Creole like glossary so that we would know like what specific words were and how to use the phrases and in what context and things like that, which was really cool, because that was like a hallmark of the IP. And so I do feel like understanding what the hallmarks are of the brand really does lend itself to an adaptation. So if you know like not only like the genre tropes, and like the characterization, but also very specifically like what legs does the world stand on? What is everyone expecting when they actually go into Sirius Station? Like, what does that look like in terms of like vibe and feel? Like, what are we seeing there? And so I feel like clearly defining those is really important when it comes to adaptation. And I think that sometimes when people are a little bit angry about adaptation is because they feel like they saw hallmarks in the original that did not make it to the screen, or the hallmarks that were on the screen were different, changed in some way, or perhaps not well represented in the way that people expect from the original.
Do you do similar things, Brian, when you're adapting Robotech to games and to books?
With Robotech, I don't think the thing about adapting that one specifically was trying to make people feel like they existed in the cartoon, right? To be able to say like we're doing weird, funny cartoon space opera stuff. And I think previous adaptations of Robotech tried to make it, not to say that I didn't love them, and I did. I played the hell out of the previous iterations of the game, but the thing that they missed was exactly like what Mari was saying. Like they missed parts of the representation, and Robotech in previous iterations had missed some of that ridiculous space opera, soap opera, right? Where I'm going to go call my commander an old bat and then get in trouble and have problems that resolve from that. Everybody was a cool pilot. And so making sure that the game represented a way for people to step into the cartoon as they saw it, it was really important. So, when you're doing an adaptation into a game, you want people to be able to utilize it in a way that they can step into the world that they loved, but also be able to throw that out and use it as a scaffold to kind of do what they want with. Um, and so for me, my primary job on that book was just showing players that might not have actually seen the show what it could look like from the inside with fiction from the points of view of the characters, and what the world felt like in their shoes to help them get into that role-playing spirit. And so yeah, I just spent so much time living in that world, and that's what it was for me as part of that adaptation. And with the Expanse, like if I were working on that, it would be exactly like the kind of stuff Mari was saying. It's really about getting into the spirit of what the original was and adapting it to the medium, in the right way, in a way that's going to work, and throwing out stuff that's not going to work for the medium. The example I give when I teach classes about stuff like this is Stephen King's Misery, right? Like, how many people have read that book and remember after watching the movie that there's huge swaths of the book that are actually the romance novel interludes?
Yeah.
Would those have worked in the movie? I think it would have totally undercut the tone, but they work really well in the book. And I don't think anybody misses them. You know what I mean? Because the movie touched enough of what the book meant to do, and it gave us the feeling of what the book was meant to give us.
I like that. I like that if you have the right themes and the same feeling, if you feel like you can make the person feel like you're in it still, that you can make changes like they obviously did, but they can keep it. And if you keep the hallmark things, if you understand what those are and have somebody that's compiled those and said, this is what it is,
Yeah.
then you're good.
But
That's
it
awesome.
needs to make sense for the medium. Like
Yeah.
it absolutely needs to make sense for the medium. And if it doesn't make sense for the medium, you know, get rid of it. I think that's why people have struggled with adaptations of Stephen King's It, to be honest, right? Like the big giant spider is really scary in the book,
In your
but on
head.
screen,
Yeah.
yeah, on screen
Yeah,
it hasn't worked very well.
Yeah.
sure. That's a great
Well,
And
this
example.
yeah,
this has been awesome, everybody. I appreciate so much talking to you. I love just a chance to sit down and hear all you guys' ideas on everything. Thanks everybody for listening in too. I wish we could keep talking for hours and hours about this. This is fascinating stuff. But we are going to tune out now. I hope that you go pick up this book. I hope that you read it. If you haven't, I hope you check out the TV show too. Check out the games and check out the links in the description for where you can find all these fine folks and check out their stuff. They are great and amazing writers, and hope that you find some new things to read. So appreciate that with everybody. We'll be back again next month. At the end of next month, we will be doing. Oh, I just had a copy of it. Anyway, we're going to be doing The Rune Lords by Dave McFarland, and we're going to have fun with that. So, did I say McFarland? That was wrong.
I didn't think you did. I thought you said David.
I did. I totally said Dave McFarland instead of David Farland
Oh,
because I'm an idiot. But yeah, we're doing The Rune Lords next month. Tune in for that. It's going to be fun. We're going back to fantasy again, and it'll be a lot of great stuff. So, thanks again. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Marty. And thank you, Brian. I appreciate you being here. And we'll see everybody next month.
Yay.
Bye.